Hello, Night Seekers, and welcome to Lacuna Noir. This is where forgotten stories and gentle voices meet, carrying you softly into peaceful sleep, wrapped in mystery. Before tonight's stories begin, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let me know. And a little note before we begin. You may notice a few brief ads in the first 10 minutes, but after that, the rest of the video is completely ad-free. Just you, the silence, and the stories. So settle in, get comfortable, and let the night carry you. If you're drawn to these quiet, shadowed nights, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a story when darkness calls. My brother always had terrible night terrors. They were awful for him, but they were also frightening for everyone else in the house to witness. He would wake up in the middle of the night screaming, crying, talking to things that were not there, or staring at a corner of the room like someone was standing in it. Sometimes he would run through the hallway without fully waking up. Sometimes he would sit upright in bed with his eyes open, but he would not recognize anyone who spoke to him. For years, my parents tried everything they could think of. They would sit with him until he calmed down. They would leave lights on in the hallway. They would let him sleep in their room when things got especially bad. Eventually, it became normal for him to sleep on the floor beside my parents' bed. He did that until he was 16 years old. It sounds strange when you say it out loud, but in our house, it had become part of life. My brother had bad nights. My parents dealt with them. Everyone else tried not to make things worse. My bedroom was the closest room to my parents' room, so I heard a lot of it growing up. I heard the floorboards creak when my parents got up to help him. I heard my brother crying through the wall. I heard his voice when he mumbled in his sleep. I heard doors open and close at strange hours. Sometimes I would wake up, listen for a moment, and then roll over, because I knew it was probably another one of his night terrors. I got used to it. That was why, on the night I saw that thing in my room, I did not immediately panic. I was asleep in bed with my cat under the blankets beside me. She always slept with me when she could. She was not the kind of cat who liked being carried around or held for too long, but at night she liked to curl up against my legs or tuck herself beneath the covers near my stomach. She made me feel safe in a childish way. If she was relaxed, I felt like there was nothing to worry about. That night had started normally. I had gone to bed, turned off the light, and listened to the usual sounds of the house settling down. My parents were asleep in their room. My brother was probably on their floor, where he usually slept. The hallway light was either off or very dim. I do not remember the exact time, but it was deep into the night. The kind of hour where the house feels completely different, because everyone is asleep and every little sound seems louder. I remember waking up suddenly. Not because I heard screaming, not because someone called my name. I woke up because my cat moved. She had been curled under the blanket with me, warm and still. Then, without warning, she launched herself out from under the covers. She did not just get up and walk away, she leapt. Her claws caught the blanket for a second as she scrambled free. Then she landed on the bed, her entire body stiff, her back arched high, her fur puffed out, her ears flattened against her head. She started hissing so hard it sounded like something was wrong with her. At first, I was too sleepy to understand. I opened my eyes and looked toward her. She was staring across the room, not at the door, not at the window, at my mirror. I had a mirror on the wall near the end of my bed. It was tall enough that I could see myself in it when I stood up, but in the dark, it mostly reflected shadows. That night, there was just enough moonlight coming through the curtains for me to see the basic shape of the room. and there was someone standing in front of the mirror. My first thought was that it was my brother. He was standing with his back to me, wearing white underpants. That was something he might have done during one of his night terrors. He would sometimes get up confused, walk around, or stand somewhere without speaking. He had scared everyone in the house before, so seeing him in my room did not immediately feel impossible. I was groggy and irritated more than afraid. I remember saying his name in a tired voice. I told him to go back to bed. I might have said something like, "What are you doing?" "Go back to Mom and Dad's room." He did not answer. He stood in front of the mirror without moving. The cat hissed again. I looked at her, then back at him. I told him again to go back to bed. Then he turned around. The second he faced me, I knew it was not my brother. That thought hit me so hard it felt physical. That's not my brother. It was the only thing running through my mind. That's not my brother. That's not my brother. That's not my brother. The figure had been turned away from me before, and the white underpants had made my brain try to place him as my brother. But when he turned, there was nothing familiar about him. The face was wrong. The body was wrong. The entire shape of him was wrong. He was pale, not pale like someone with light skin standing in moonlight. Pale in a way that looked colorless, almost gray-white, like something that had never been outside in the sun. His skin looked stretched too tightly over his face. His body looked thin and narrow, but not weak, more like a long, empty shape wearing the idea of a person. Then he seemed to get taller. I do not know how else to describe it. At first, he was the height of a normal person. Then, while I stared at him, he seemed to rise. His shoulders lifted higher. His head moved upward. His body stretched until he looked too tall for my room. It was like watching a shadow grow on a wall, except he was not a shadow. He was standing there, solid enough to block the faint light behind him, pale enough that I could see him clearly. He kept getting taller until it felt as though his head was nearly at the ceiling. My room was not large. Nothing that tall should have been able to stand there comfortably. But he did. He stared at me. His eyes were black, not dark brown or dark in the usual way eyes look in a dim room. They were huge, completely black, and too wide for his face. They stood out more than anything else. I could not stop looking at them. They did not blink. They did not move. They were just fixed on me. I remember feeling like the room had become smaller around me, like my bed was the only place left in the world, and that thing was standing at the edge of it. I could not move. I could not scream. I could not even pull the blanket over my head. My cat reacted before I did. She jumped from the bed to the top of my bookshelf. I still do not know how she got up there so quickly. The shelf was tall, and she normally would not have climbed it in one movement. But she was suddenly on top of it, pressed against the wall, hissing and spitting down at the figure. She kept hissing, loud, angry, terrified hissing. Her tail was huge. Her fur was standing straight up all along her back. She looked like she wanted to attack and escape at the same time. The thing did not react to her. It did not turn toward her. It did not look annoyed. It just kept staring at me. I remember the feeling of trying to make myself move. My body felt frozen, but I knew I had to do something. I kept thinking that if I could turn on the light, everything would be normal. The room would be normal. The mirror would be normal. My brother would not be there. The thing would be gone. I reached for the lamp beside my bed. My hand was shaking so badly that I missed the switch the first time. The figure did not move. My cat kept hissing. I found the switch and snapped the light on. The room filled with yellow light. And there was nothing there. No tall figure, no pale skin, no black eyes, no one standing in front of the mirror. The mirror reflected only my room, my bed, the bookshelf, the clothes on the floor, and the door. Everything looked exactly the way it had before I fell asleep. For a second, I just sat there, staring at the empty spot. My cat was still on top of the bookshelf. She was still hissing. That was what made it impossible for me to convince myself that I had been dreaming. If it had only been me, maybe I could have believed that I woke up from a nightmare and saw something in the darkness. Maybe I could have told myself that sleep and fear had mixed together in my head. But the cat had been asleep beside me. The cat had reacted first. She had leapt out from under the blanket before I even saw anything. She had hissed at that empty space before I understood there was someone standing there. And after I turned on the light, she stayed on top of the bookshelf, staring at the same part of the room like she still knew something was there. I screamed for my parents. I do not remember what I said exactly. I probably just screamed loudly enough that they woke up. I remember my dad coming first, then my mom. They rushed into the room expecting something serious. A fire, a break-in, someone hurt. Instead, they found me sitting upright in bed, shaking, with the light on and the cat perched on top of the bookshelf. I pointed at the mirror. I told them something had been in my room. I told them I thought it was my brother at first. I told them it had turned around. I told them it was too tall and pale and had huge black eyes. My parents looked around the room. There was nothing. They checked the closet. They checked behind the door. They looked out the window. They looked under the bed, even though I was too old to really believe something could be under there. Nothing. Then my brother came into the room. He was wearing pajamas. Real pajamas, not white underpants. He looked tired and confused, rubbing his eyes like he had just been woken up. My parents asked him if he had come into my room. He said no. He said he had been asleep in their room. I stared at him. I remember looking at his face and knowing, without any doubt, that the thing I saw had not been him. My parents tried to calm me down. They said I had probably had a bad dream. They said I woke up confused and saw something in the dark. They said my cat may have heard a noise in the house and gotten scared. That explanation should have made me feel better. It did not. I told them it was not a dream. I said I was awake. I said the cat saw it too. My dad looked at the cat, who was still staring down from the bookshelf. By then, she had stopped hissing, but she would not come down. She sat there with her ears back, watching the room. Eventually, my parents got me to calm down enough to lie back down. They stayed for a while. One of them may have left the hallway light on. I remember not wanting the bedroom light turned off. I remember being scared to look at the mirror again. The rest of the night felt endless. Every little shadow made me think he was back. Every time the house creaked, I thought I heard someone moving near the mirror. Every time my cat shifted on top of the shelf, I thought she had seen him again. But I never saw the thing again after that. Not in my room. Not in the hallway. Not in the mirror. Not anywhere. For years, I tried to put it away in my mind. I knew my brother had night terrors. I knew that watching him struggle with them had probably affected me. I knew I had grown up hearing strange sounds at night and seeing him wander around half asleep. It would have been easy for people to say my brain took that fear and turned it into something else. I wanted to believe that. I wanted it to have been a nightmare. But I could never forget the way my cat reacted. And I could never forget the exact thought that went through my head when that figure turned around. That's not my brother. Not, who is that? Not, why is he in my room? Just a complete certainty that the thing standing in front of my mirror had only looked like my brother from behind. Years passed. My brother's night terrors became less frequent as he got older, but he still struggled with sleep. He eventually stopped sleeping on my parents' floor. Life moved on. We grew up, moved out, got jobs, had relationships, and became adults. I never told him about what I saw. I do not know why. Maybe I did not want to scare him. Maybe I thought he would laugh. Maybe I thought it was too strange to bring up after so much time. It became one of those memories you keep to yourself because you know saying it out loud will make people look at you differently. Then, around 20 years later, I heard him talking to his new girlfriend. We were all together, talking casually. I do not remember what started the subject. Maybe someone mentioned childhood fears. Maybe someone was talking about nightmares. But my brother began explaining why he had always had trouble sleeping when he was younger. He said he could never sleep because something watched him. At first, I thought he was talking about his night terrors in general. I assumed he meant he had felt scared in the dark or had recurring nightmares. Then he described it. He called it the long, skinny dude with white skin. He said it watched him all the time when he was a kid. I froze. I do not remember breathing for a second. I looked at him, waiting for him to laugh or explain that it was a dream. But he did not. He said it casually, like it was just one of the strange things he remembered from childhood, like it had always been part of his sleep problems, the long, skinny dude with white skin. Those words hit me harder than anything had in years. I had never told him about the thing in my room. He had never told me about the thing that watched him. But we were describing the same figure, the same pale skin, the same long, thin body, the same impossible height, the same feeling that it was watching from somewhere in the dark. I did not say anything right away. I could not. All I could think about was that night, the cat hissing on top of the bookshelf, the mirror, the pale figure rising toward the ceiling, and those huge black eyes fixed on me. For 20 years, I had tried to convince myself that I was alone in that experience. Then I realized I was not. Maybe my brother's night terrors had not been only night terrors. Maybe he had been seeing something that no one else understood. Maybe the thing I saw in my room had been watching him for years before it ever turned to look at me. I still do not know what it was. I never saw it again, and I am completely fine with that. But I will never forget the sound of my cat hissing in the dark, or the way that pale figure turned toward me, or the certainty that filled my mind before I even understood why. That's not my brother. When I was in middle school, my family moved into a new apartment. It was not far from where we had lived before, but everything about it felt unfamiliar at first. The layout was different, the walls had a different smell, the floors made different noises, and the sounds from the other apartments came through at strange hours. It took me a while to get used to hearing people walking above us, doors closing in the hallway, pipes knocking inside the walls, and cars passing outside at night. Most of the apartment was fine. The living room felt normal. The kitchen felt normal. My parents' room felt normal. Even the hallway, which was narrow and darker than the rest of the apartment, only bothered me when the lights were off. But my bedroom felt wrong almost immediately. I could not explain it to anyone because I did not understand it myself. There was nothing obviously creepy about the room. It was not old-looking. It did not have strange stains on the walls or broken furniture left behind by the people who lived there before us. It had a window, a closet, a bed, and a small area where I kept my clothes and school things. During the daytime, sunlight came through the window and made it look like any other bedroom. But at night, I could never relax in it. The first few nights after we moved in, I thought I was simply uncomfortable because everything was new. I had always had trouble falling asleep in unfamiliar places. Whenever we stayed somewhere else, even at a family member's house, I would lie awake longer than usual. I needed time to get used to the room, the sounds, and the way the darkness looked. So when I started feeling uneasy in my new bedroom, I did not think it meant anything. At least, not at first. The feeling began as something small. I would lie in bed with my back facing part of the room, trying to sleep, and suddenly I would feel as if someone was standing behind me. Not near the door, not outside in the hallway, inside my room. Right behind me. It was never a sound that woke me up. I never heard footsteps crossing the floor. I never heard the closet door open. I never heard breathing. It was only a feeling, but it was so strong that I could not ignore it. It felt like someone was staring at the back of my head, not casually looking in my direction. Staring, the feeling was intense, almost painful. It was like burning eyes pressed against the back of my skull. I would be lying there with my eyes closed, trying to convince myself that I was tired and imagining things, but the pressure would not go away. I knew where it felt like the eyes were coming from, somewhere behind me, somewhere near the middle of the room. Sometimes it felt like the thing watching me was standing close to the bed. Other nights it felt farther away, perhaps near the closet or against the wall. But no matter where I thought it was, the feeling always stayed the same. Someone was looking at me, and they did not want me to turn around. I never did, at least not in the beginning. I would lie still and tell myself I was being ridiculous. I would think about school. I would think about things I had to do the next day. I would count numbers in my head or focus on my breathing. Sometimes I would pull the blanket up higher, almost over my face, even though I knew that would not really protect me from anything. The strange part was that I did not want to look behind me. Normally, when you think someone is watching you, you turn around, you check, you prove yourself wrong. You see that the room is empty, laugh at yourself, and go back to bed. But every time I felt that burning stare, I could not make myself turn. It was like some part of me was afraid that if I looked, I would find exactly what I expected to find. I would lie there in the dark, eyes closed, afraid to sleep, but more afraid to look. I never told my parents. I thought about it several times. I thought about going into their room and saying that I was scared. But I was in middle school by then. I felt too old to wake them up because I thought something might be in my room. I knew what they would probably say. They would tell me I was adjusting to the new apartment. They would say the move had made me anxious. They would say I had watched something scary or let my imagination run wild. They would check under the bed, look in the closet, turn on the light, and tell me everything was fine. Then I would have to go back into my room anyway. So I kept it to myself. Weeks passed. Then, months. The feeling never fully went away. Some nights were better than others. On good nights, I would be tired enough that I fell asleep quickly. On those nights, I barely thought about the room. But other nights, especially when the apartment was quiet, the feeling would return. I would lie in bed, facing the wall, staring at the darkness near my pillow, and feel those eyes behind me. Watching, waiting, sometimes I would hear normal apartment sounds and try to use them to calm myself. Someone upstairs dropping something. Water moving through the pipes. A car door closing outside. The elevator opening somewhere down the hallway. But the sounds never explained the feeling. The feeling was too focused. It did not seem connected to the building or the noises around me. It felt personal, like someone had chosen my room and was standing there only to watch me. I started sleeping with my bedroom light on sometimes. Not every night, because I did not want my parents asking why. But on the worst nights, I would leave the lamp on beside my bed. The soft yellow light made the room look safer. I could see the outline of the dresser, the closet door, the chair where I threw my clothes, and the wall near the end of my bed. But even with the light on, I would occasionally feel watched. That was worse in a different way. At least in the dark, I could tell myself my mind was making something out of shadows. But when the light was on and I still felt eyes burning into the back of my head, there was nothing easy to blame it on. I started making small rules for myself. I would not look toward the closet after I turned off the light. I would not let my feet hang over the side of the bed. I would not sleep with my back toward the doorway. I would not turn around when I felt the staring. I told myself those rules were just habits. I pretended they were not about fear. But they were. Every night, I was avoiding something I had never actually seen. Then one night, I finally got tired of being scared. I do not remember exactly what had made that night different. Maybe I had been stressed from school. Maybe I had not slept well for several nights in a row. Maybe I was just annoyed at myself for lying there, afraid of an empty room. I remember feeling angry, not angry at anyone else, angry at myself. I was tired of feeling like a little kid. I was tired of lying in bed with my eyes shut, scared to turn around. I was tired of making rules and pretending that I was not afraid. I told myself that there was nothing in the room. There had never been anything in the room. I was letting my imagination torture me because I was in a new apartment and had become nervous at night. That night, I decided I was going to prove it. I was lying on my side, facing the wall. The room was dark, but not completely black. Some weak light from outside came through the window, just enough to make the room look gray and soft around the edges. I could see the faint outline of the wall in front of me. I could see part of my blanket. I could see the shape of my bedroom door across the room. Then the feeling came back. The burning stare. It came suddenly and hard, as if someone had walked into the room without making a sound and stopped behind me. My body tensed. My heart started beating faster. For 1 second, I wanted to do what I always did. I wanted to close my eyes tighter, pull the blanket higher, and wait until exhaustion forced me to sleep. But I had promised myself I would look. I remember taking a breath. Then another. I told myself, turn around. I did not move at first. My body did not want to listen. I could feel the cold space behind me, and it felt heavy somehow. The silence in the room seemed different from normal silence. It felt like the silence was waiting, too. I told myself again that I was being ridiculous. Then I turned around. What I saw was the floating head of a middle-aged man. It was not standing on a body. It was not a shadow that looked vaguely like a face. It was a head, floating in the darkness behind me. At first, I could not understand what I was seeing. My brain tried to make it into something else. A reflection, a trick of the moonlight, a shape made by clothing on a chair. Anything normal. But it was too clear. It was a man's face. He looked middle-aged. He had a full adult face. Not old, but not young. I remember his features clearly even now. I remember his hairline, the shape of his cheeks, the way his mouth was set, and the expression in his eyes. He was furious. That is the word that has always stayed with me. He did not look sad. He did not look confused. He did not look like a ghost asking for help. He looked angry, not mildly annoyed, not just serious. He looked like he hated me, like he had been staring at me for a long time and was angry that I had finally turned around. His eyes were fixed on mine. The anger on his face was so strong that it made me freeze. I could not move. I could not scream. I could not even fully breathe for a moment. I remember staring at him and feeling like every part of my body had gone cold. My room was suddenly not my room anymore. The bed did not feel safe. The walls did not feel solid. The apartment did not feel like home. All I could see was his face. It hovered in the darkness at about the height of my head, maybe a little higher. There was no neck beneath it, no shoulders, no body fading into shadow, just the head. And those angry eyes. I had expected that if I turned around, I would either see nothing or see some harmless object that had been scaring me. Instead, I saw the exact reason I had been afraid to look. I do not know how long I stared at it. It may have been only a second. It may have been several. But in that moment, it felt like time stopped. I had no idea what I was supposed to do. I could not call for my parents. I was too scared that making noise would make it come closer. I could not turn on the light because my arm felt too heavy to move. I could not look away because I was afraid that if I did, it would move. So I did the only thing I could think of. I turned back toward the wall. I pretended I had not seen anything. That sounds ridiculous now, but it was the only response I had. I just rolled back over as carefully as I could and faced the wall again. I pulled the blanket up close to my face. I shut my eyes, and I tried to act like the floating head had not been there. I kept telling myself that I had imagined it. I told myself I had been half asleep. I told myself I was dreaming, but I was not asleep. I knew I was awake. I knew exactly what I had seen. I lay there as still as I could, afraid to move even 1 inch. I did not want to turn around again. I did not want to check whether it was still there. I did not want to know whether it had moved closer to the bed. The burning feeling behind my head was still there. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was real. I could not tell anymore. I stayed awake for what felt like hours. Every few minutes, I thought I heard a tiny shift in the room. A soft sound that could have been the building settling. A faint creak in the floor. Something almost too quiet to identify. Each time I became convinced the head was moving. I imagined it floating closer. I imagined it hovering over the bed. I imagined those angry eyes staring down at me while I pretended to sleep. At some point, exhaustion took over. I do not remember falling asleep. I only remember waking up in the morning with sunlight coming through the window. The room looked completely normal. My clothes were where I had left them. My chair was in the corner. The closet door was shut. The walls were the same. The bed was the same. There was no sign that anything had happened. But I knew something had. For the rest of the time we lived in that apartment, I never turned around again when I felt watched. I would still get the feeling sometimes. It was not every night, but it happened often enough. I would be lying in bed, trying to sleep, and suddenly I would feel that familiar pressure at the back of my head. Those burning eyes. On the worst nights, I would leave the light on until morning. Other nights, I would turn toward the wall and force myself not to move. I would tell myself that it was nothing. I would tell myself I was too old to be scared of darkness. But I never looked. Not after that one time. I never told my parents about the floating head. Even years later, I never told them. I knew they would not have believed me. They might have been kind about it, but they would have said I was dreaming. They would have told me I had sleep paralysis or had been caught between waking and sleeping. Maybe that is what happened. I have thought about that possibility many times. Maybe I woke up at the wrong moment. Maybe the dark room and my fear shaped a shadow into a face. Maybe my brain created the image because I had spent so many nights feeling watched. But there is one reason I still cannot completely dismiss it. I remember his face. I remember it far too well. I remember the anger. I remember how real his eyes looked. I remember the way he seemed to be staring directly into me, not just at me. And I remember the feeling that he had been there before I ever turned around. Like he had been watching me from the beginning. Like he had been waiting for me to finally look. When I was a student, I lived in a shared house with my partner and one of our friends. It was not an especially old or dramatic house. It was just a normal student place. The kind of home that always felt a little too full of furniture, wires, laundry, books, and half-finished mugs of tea. We each had our own routines. My partner and I had our room, and our friend had the room next to us. The walls were not especially thick, so we could usually hear when someone was watching something, typing at a computer, taking a shower, or moving around late at night. The house made normal noises, too. Pipes clicked. Floorboards creaked. The heating made strange sounds when it came on. The roof shifted whenever the wind picked up. Because of that, none of us were the kind of people who panicked over every small sound. Living with other people teaches you quickly that there is usually an explanation. Someone is awake later than you thought. Someone left the television on downstairs. A phone notification goes off from another room. A loose pipe knocks inside the wall. A mouse might be moving somewhere you cannot see. Houses have a way of sounding alive at night, even when there's nobody awake inside them. At the time, I had been studying hard and was usually exhausted by the end of the day. I would spend hours in lectures, reading, writing assignments, or trying to catch up on things I had left too late. By the time I finally got into bed, I was often too tired to think much about anything. That was why, the first time I heard the sound, I did not get up to investigate. I was just beginning to fall asleep. You know that point when you are no longer fully awake but have not drifted off yet? Your body feels heavy, your thoughts start becoming random, and you are aware of the room without really paying attention to it. I was in that half-asleep state, lying in bed and trying to get comfortable. Then I heard music. It was loud enough that it cut through the quiet of the room immediately. At first, I thought it was coming from the next bedroom. Our friend had a computer in there, and it was common for him to be up later than us. He would play games, watch videos, listen to music, or work on something online. I assumed he had a notification sound set up on his computer. But the tune itself was strange. It was the sound of an electronic toy, playing a single line from Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Not the whole song, not a musical version playing softly in the background. Just one short line, played in the high, tinny, plastic sound you would expect from a cheap children's toy. The kind of sound that comes from a toy piano, a musical teddy bear, or one of those brightly colored baby toys with buttons on it. It was loud enough that I could hear every note clearly. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. Then it stopped. That was it. For a few seconds, I lay there listening. Nothing else followed. No voices, no footsteps, no laughter from the next room, no sound of someone getting up to turn the computer off. I remember thinking it was a strange choice for a notification tone. It seemed like such an odd sound for an adult student to use on his computer. But people do weird things. Maybe he had downloaded something as a joke. Maybe he had a game installed that used children's sounds. Maybe it was just one of those random alerts you forget about until it goes off. I was tired, so I did not think much more about it. I rolled over and eventually went to sleep. The next day, I saw our friend in the house, probably in the kitchen or living room. I was in a joking mood and decided to tease him about what I had heard. I said something like, "What kind of computer notification plays Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star in the middle of the night?" He looked at me like I had said something completely random. He asked what I meant. I laughed and repeated it. I told him I had heard that loud electronic toy sound coming from his room the night before. I said I thought he had set a child's nursery rhyme as some kind of notification. But he genuinely had no idea what I was talking about. At first, I thought he was messing with me. He was the kind of person who might deny something just to keep a joke going. So I kept pushing it, telling him it had been loud and that I heard it clearly while I was trying to sleep. He did not laugh. He looked confused. Then he took me into his room and showed me his computer. It was unplugged, not simply turned off. Unplugged from the wall. He told me it had been like that all night. I remember staring at the computer for a second. The monitor was dark. There were no lights on it, no power cables running to it, no speakers connected. Nothing, he explained, that he had not used it that evening and had unplugged it before going to bed. There was no way it could have played a notification sound in the middle of the night. I tried to suggest other possibilities. Maybe he had a phone that made the noise. Maybe something else in his room had gone off. Maybe an alarm had been set somewhere. But he shook his head. There were no toys in his room, no electronic devices that played music, no old clock or radio that could have made that sound. He had been asleep when I heard it. I remember feeling embarrassed at that point. I had made fun of him over something that apparently had not happened. I did not want to insist too much, because I knew it would sound like I had dreamed it. I had been half asleep. Maybe it had been part of a dream that felt real. Maybe I had heard something outside, and my brain turned it into a familiar tune. So I brushed it off. I said, maybe I had imagined it. He laughed a little, probably relieved that he was not being accused of having a nursery rhyme sound effect on his computer. My partner, who had not heard anything, did not think much about it either. Nobody believed me. And honestly, I did not fully believe myself. Not yet. A few nights passed with nothing unusual happening. The house returned to normal. We studied, cooked, watched television, complained about money, discussed assignments, and lived the ordinary, messy routine of students sharing a place. The strange tune became one of those small moments you almost forget because there is no proof and no obvious explanation. Then I heard it again. This time I was not lying in bed. It was late at night, and I had stepped out of my bedroom to use the bathroom. The hallway was dark except for a little light coming from downstairs or the glow from a street lamp outside. Everyone else seemed to be asleep. The house had that deep nighttime quiet where even a small step feels loud. I had just come out of the room when the music started. The same tune, the same electronic sound, the same single line of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. It was louder this time. Or maybe it only seemed louder because I was standing in the hallway instead of under blankets with my head on a pillow. The notes echoed through the upstairs part of the house in a way that made it hard to tell exactly where they were coming from at first. I froze. I stood in the hallway listening. The sound played once, then stopped. For a second, the house was silent again. I looked toward our friend's bedroom. His door was closed. There was no light underneath it. I could not hear typing, talking, or movement. I considered knocking, but I did not want to wake him up just because I thought I had heard something strange again. Then I heard the tune start a second time. This time, I knew where it was coming from. It was above me, from the attic. The sound was coming from the ceiling. I remember standing there, staring upward. There was no reason for anything in the attic to be making music. As far as I knew, none of us had stored anything up there. We barely used the attic at all. It was not a finished space. It was just a dark, dusty area above the bedrooms, accessed through a hatch or small opening. The music sounded exactly like a toy, high-pitched, cheerful, and completely wrong for the middle of the night. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. Then silence. I did not go up there that night. I wish I could say I immediately grabbed a flashlight and investigated, but I did not. I was scared, even though I did not want to admit it. I went to the bathroom quickly, returned to my bedroom, shut the door, and got back into bed. I lay awake for a long time afterward. Every time the house made a normal sound, I listened closely. I waited for the tune to begin again. I imagined a small child's toy sitting somewhere in the dark attic, playing by itself. I imagined a toy with weak batteries, turning on at random. I imagined that maybe someone had left it there years earlier and it was malfunctioning. That was the explanation I held on to. It had to be an old toy. Maybe the previous tenants had children. Maybe they had stored boxes in the attic and forgotten something. Maybe the toy was damaged and changes in temperature or pressure caused it to activate. Maybe it had a motion sensor. Maybe an animal moving around up there triggered it. There were plenty of possibilities. But I still did not like the sound of it. The next day, I told my partner and our friend what I had heard. This time, I was more serious. I said the sound had not come from the computer. I said I had heard it again while I was in the hallway. I said it came from the attic. Neither of them seemed convinced at first. Our friend probably assumed I had heard something from outside. My partner thought maybe there was an old device somewhere in the ceiling. Both of them were reasonable explanations, and I wanted to believe them. Still, we decided to check. We went up into the attic together. The three of us climbed up with torches and looked around. I expected it to be full of old things. Most attics are. You expect boxes, broken furniture, bags of clothes, old decorations, forgotten toys, dusty suitcases, maybe even things left by previous tenants. I thought we would find some plastic toy buried under a pile of junk, probably with dying batteries. Instead, the attic was empty, completely empty. There were no boxes, no furniture, no bags, no old clothes, no toys, nothing, just insulation, wooden beams, dust, and the dull smell of an unused space. We checked every corner. We looked around the edges where things could have been pushed out of sight. We shone lights along the rafters. We checked behind the insulation where possible. We looked for wires, old electrical equipment, speakers, alarms, anything that could have played the tune. There was nothing. Not even an old, forgotten object. The attic was so empty that it made the situation worse. At least if we had found a toy, we could have laughed about it. We could have taken the batteries out, thrown it away, and moved on. But there was no source for the sound at all. I remember standing in that empty attic, looking at my partner and our friend. Neither of them had much to say. They could see why I was unsettled now. Still, nobody had heard the music except me. That made it easy for them to doubt it. Maybe I had misheard something. Maybe the sound had come from outside and echoed strangely. Maybe a neighbor had a child's toy in their house. Maybe someone walking past had played music from a phone. Maybe the sound was not actually coming from the attic, but only seemed to be. All of those explanations were possible. But I knew what I heard. And I knew it had sounded directly above me. After searching the attic, we tried to forget about it. For a while, nothing happened. Then one night, it came back. I was in bed again, close to falling asleep. The house was quiet. My partner was beside me. I remember being tired enough that I had almost drifted off. Then the music began. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. The notes rang out through the room, loud and clear. I sat up immediately. For a second, I could not tell whether I was dreaming. I looked toward my partner, who was still asleep. Then the tune played again. I reached over and shook them awake. "Listen," I whispered. My partner opened their eyes, confused and tired. At first, they did not understand what I was asking. Then, the music started again. That electronic, childlike tune. The one line from Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. My partner heard it. I watched their face change. They went from half asleep to completely awake in a second. They looked toward the ceiling. The same way I had stood in the hallway before, they seemed to understand immediately that the sound was coming from above us, from the attic. Neither of us moved for a while. We just listened. The tune played once more, then stopped. The silence afterward felt enormous. My partner did not say much at first. I think they were trying to make sense of it. Maybe they hoped it was a neighbor's television, a phone outside, an alarm, something normal. But the sound was too distinct. It sounded like it was inside the house. It sounded too close to be coming from far away, and we had already checked the attic. There was nothing there. After that night, the story became real to everyone in the house. Before, it had just been me saying I heard something. It was easy to wonder whether I had dreamed it or misunderstood what I heard. But now my partner had heard it too. They could not explain it either. We went back into the attic again after that. We searched even more carefully. We looked for anything hidden between beams. We checked whether there were any old electrical lines that could have led to an unused device. We looked for signs of animals. Maybe a bird had gotten in. Maybe there were rats or mice moving around. Maybe something had triggered an object we had somehow missed. But there was still nothing. No toy. No radio. No hidden speaker. No battery-operated device. No evidence that anyone had ever stored anything up there. The attic remained completely empty. The music continued on and off for a while. It did not happen every night, which almost made it worse. It was unpredictable. Some nights were quiet. Other nights, one of us would hear that same small section of the song, loud enough to make everyone stop what they were doing. It never played the full melody. It never changed songs. It was always the same short line, "Twinkle, twinkle, little star." Then silence. It never came with footsteps. It never came with voices. We never saw movement in the attic. Nothing else supernatural happened in the house. Doors did not slam. Lights did not turn on by themselves. Nobody saw shadows in the hallway. Nobody felt hands touching them while they slept. There was only that tune, a children's nursery rhyme, playing in an empty attic in the middle of the night. Eventually, the sound stopped. I do not remember exactly when it stopped for good. Maybe we moved out not long after. Maybe it faded away over time. Maybe one day we realized that weeks had passed without hearing it. But we never found out what caused it. That is the part that still stays with me. There was no mystery object discovered years later. No old toy found beneath insulation. No neighbor admitting they had a sound machine. No damaged smoke alarm playing an odd warning tone. No explanation that tied everything together neatly. We searched the attic. It was empty. My partner heard the sound. Our friend's computer was unplugged. And yet, more than once, an electronic toy sound played a line from Twinkle. Twinkle, Little Star, from somewhere above our rooms. I still think about it sometimes when I hear that song. Normally, it is harmless. It is one of the first songs children learn. It is gentle, soft, and meant to make people feel safe. But when it comes from a dark attic at night, with no toy and no child anywhere in the house, it becomes something else. It becomes a sound you do not want to hear twice. Sorry to pause for just a moment. If this is your first time here, welcome. I hope you're enjoying the calm so far. If you'd like more nights like this, true stories, gentle rain, no interruptions, please subscribe to Lacuna Noir. It really helps me keep creating these peaceful experiences for you. And tap the bell so you're here every time a new story arrives in the dark. Now, back to the story. One night, my friend and I were walking down a country road at around 10 o'clock. It was the kind of road that felt completely different at night than it did during the day. In daylight, it was probably just a quiet rural lane surrounded by trees and hedges. But after dark, with no streetlights and no houses close by, it felt cut off from everything. There were no lamps along the road, no porch lights, no passing cars, no glow from a town in the distance. The road disappeared into darkness in both directions. To make it worse, there was a thick canopy of trees hanging over the entire stretch. The branches reached across from both sides of the road and met overhead, creating a tunnel of leaves and limbs. Even though the moon was out somewhere above the clouds, almost none of its light reached the ground. The trees blocked it all. The darkness under that canopy was heavy. It was not the normal darkness of a quiet street where your eyes slowly adjust and you can still see the outlines of fences, houses, or the pavement. This was the kind of darkness that made the road ahead look endless and empty. You could see only a few feet in front of you. Everything beyond that disappeared. My friend had brought a small speaker with him, and he was playing music while we walked. It was loud enough to fill the silence, but not loud enough to wake anyone. At first, it made the walk feel less creepy. The music gave us something to focus on. It made the road feel less empty. We talked as we walked, probably about nothing important. The usual things friends talk about late at night. Whatever had happened that day. Something funny we had seen online. Random stories. We were relaxed enough at first. The music covered the sound of our footsteps and made the darkness feel less serious. But there was always something uncomfortable about that road. You could not see very far ahead. The trees made strange shapes in the dark. The wind moved through the branches overhead, but because the canopy was so thick, you could not always tell where the sound was coming from. A small noise in the bushes could sound much closer than it really was. Still, we kept walking. Then I noticed something in the middle of the road. At first, I thought it was a piece of debris, maybe a branch that had fallen from the trees, maybe a plastic bag or an old box blown into the road. It was too dark to see clearly, and the music was still playing, so I did not hear anything unusual. But as we got closer, the shape became more defined. It was an animal, a fox. At least, I thought it was a fox. It stood directly in the middle of the road, perfectly still. It was not crouched down or sniffing around. It was not moving from one side of the road to the other. It was not looking for food, reacting to the music, or trying to get away from us. It was just standing there. Frozen, the fox was facing slightly toward us, but it did not run when we got closer. Most wild animals move quickly when people approach. A fox would normally take off into the trees or disappear into the hedge long before two people got close enough to get a good look at it. But this one did not. It stood like a statue. For a moment, I thought it might be dead. But it was upright. Its body was stiff in a way that did not look natural. Its legs were planted in the center of the road. Its head seemed fixed in one position. I could not make out its eyes clearly in the dark, but I could tell it was looking in our direction. The strange part was not only that it did not move, it was how completely still it was. There was no twitch of the ears, no shift in its weight, no tail movement, no nervous step backward. Nothing. It looked like a fox that had been placed there. My friend kept walking because he had not noticed it yet. The music was still coming from the speaker, and I did not say anything immediately. I was trying to decide whether I was seeing it correctly. Then I heard something ahead of us, a rustling sound. It came from somewhere beyond the fox, near the side of the road. The music made it hard to tell exactly where it was coming from, but I heard leaves or brush moving. It was not loud, It was more like something shifting slowly through dry branches or grass. I looked past the fox. That was when I saw the light. There was a bench beside the road farther ahead, partly hidden by the darkness and trees. On or near the bench, I saw a single small point of white light. It was not bright enough to light up the area around it. It was just a small white shine in the dark. At first, I thought it might be someone's phone screen or a phone torch. But it was too small for that. A phone light would have spread farther. It would have reflected off the bench, the ground, or the trees. This light was too narrow and too still. Then I thought maybe it was a cigarette, but it was too white. A cigarette usually glows orange or red, even from a distance. This was pale white, almost cold-looking. It did not flicker like a cigarette either. It stayed in one place, small and sharp, hanging near the bench. I could not explain what it was. I told my friend I had heard something. At first, he did not understand what I meant because the speaker was still playing. I told him again, quieter this time, that something was moving ahead of us. He turned the music off. The silence that came afterward was immediate. It was like the road changed the second the speaker went quiet. Without the music, we could hear everything. The wind in the branches overhead, the faint movement of leaves, our own breathing, the soft sound of our shoes against the road, and somewhere ahead, that rustling noise. The fox was still in the middle of the road, still not moving. We stood there for a moment, staring at it. The white point of light near the bench remained visible. Nobody spoke. Then my friend and I started walking backward, slowly at first. We did not turn our backs. We did not run. We just took a few careful steps away from the fox, keeping our eyes on the road ahead. That was when it moved. The fox came out of its frozen state. It did not jump or bolt into the trees. It did not act startled. It simply began walking toward us. Slowly, its head stayed low. Its body moved in a calm, deliberate way. It did not seem afraid of us. It did not seem confused by the fact that we were backing away. It just walked toward us. The sound of its paws against the road was barely noticeable, but once we heard it, it made everything worse. It was too quiet. The fox was close enough now that we could see its outline more clearly, though the darkness still hid most of its features. It did not look injured. It did not look like it was limping. It did not look like a normal fox trying to cross the road. It looked like it was following us. My friend and I started walking faster. We did not say anything at first. There was no need. We both understood that the situation had stopped being normal. The fox matched us. It kept coming. We moved backward faster, trying to put more distance between ourselves and the bench, the strange white light, and whatever had been rustling in the trees. Then the fox started running. That was when we ran, too. We turned and sprinted back up the road as fast as we could. I remember hearing our feet hit the pavement. I remember the sound of branches moving above us. I remember the cold air burning in my lungs as we ran under the black canopy of trees. I did not look back right away. I was too focused on getting away from that section of road. The fox had been walking toward us in a way that felt wrong, and the possibility that it was actually chasing us made my body react before my brain could fully process it. We ran until we reached the end of the road. There was a point where the trees began to thin out, and the darkness became less complete. It was not brightly lit, but there was enough open sky that we could see farther. The road behind us still disappeared beneath the canopy, but the place where we stopped felt safer, simply because we were no longer trapped in that tunnel of trees. We stopped there, out of breath. For a while, neither of us spoke. We turned around and stared back down the road. The dark path was empty. At least, it looked empty. The trees formed a black arch over the road. The darkness beneath them was so thick that we could only see a short distance into it. The fox was gone. The strange white light was too far away to see from where we stood. The bench was hidden by the curve of the road and the trees. We stood there for about a minute, maybe longer. Neither of us wanted to go back down the road, but neither of us could stop looking at it. We were waiting to see whether the fox would come out. We were waiting to see whether it had followed us. We were waiting for some normal explanation to appear. A dog, a person, anything. The road stayed dark. Then something emerged. At first, I saw the fox. It came slowly out from under the trees, walking along the road toward the place where we were standing. It was no longer running. It was not moving quickly at all. It just stepped forward from the darkness, calm and steady. Behind it was a man. He looked old. He wore a flat cap, the kind of cap that sits low on the head with a short brim. His clothes were dark, though it was difficult to see exactly what he was wearing. The night made everything around him look flat and colorless. But his face stood out. It was very white. Not just pale because of the darkness, white enough that it caught what little light there was around the edge of the road. It looked almost unnatural against the dark trees and his dark clothing. From the distance, it was hard to see every feature, but I could see that his face looked blank and pale. He was limping. He moved slowly behind the fox, dragging one leg or favoring it as he walked. His steps were uneven. The fox moved ahead of him, close enough that they seemed connected somehow, though there was no obvious leash that I could see. The old man and the fox came out of the darkness together. Then they stopped. The fox stood in the road. The man stood behind it. And both of them stared at us. Neither of us spoke. I remember feeling like my body had stopped working properly. We had just run away from the fox because it started chasing us. We had stopped at the end of the road, hoping that we had lost it. Instead, it had come back with someone. An old man with a face so pale it looked wrong in the dark. He did not call out to us. He did not ask whether we were okay. He did not tell us that the fox belonged to him. He did not apologize for frightening us. He did not even seem surprised that we were standing there staring. He just stood still. The fox stood still too. The two of them looked down the road at us. I do not know how long we stayed there looking at them. It was probably only a few seconds, but it felt much longer. My friend and I did not wait to find out what would happen next. We ran. This time, we did not stop at the end of the road. We ran as far away from that place as we could. We did not slow down until we had reached somewhere brighter and more familiar, somewhere with houses, lights, and other people nearby. Even then, I kept looking back. I expected to see the old man limping after us. I expected to see the fox in the road. I expected to see that pale face under a streetlight. But there was nothing. The country road was behind us. The darkness under the trees was far away. And yet, I could not stop thinking about what we had seen. Maybe it was normal. Maybe the fox belonged to an old man who lived somewhere nearby. Maybe the animal had been standing in the road because it was waiting for him. Maybe the rustling came from the man walking through the trees or getting up from the bench. Maybe the white light had been some small object, a lighter, a reflective surface, or a strange angle of moonlight. Maybe the fox started moving toward us because it was curious or territorial. Maybe it ran because it was frightened. Maybe the old man had simply been walking home and had no idea how unsettling he looked in the dark. All of that is possible. But there were things that did not feel normal. The fox had been too still. It stood in the middle of the road like a statue until we turned the speaker off and began walking backward. The white light near the bench did not look like a phone or a cigarette. The fox did not run away when we moved. It walked toward us. Then it ran after us. And when it finally emerged from the darkness, it was not alone. The old man did not speak. That is the part that stayed with me most. A normal person would have said something. Even if he was angry that we had frightened his dog, he would have shouted. Even if he was confused, he would have asked what we were doing. Even if he had just been walking along the road, he would have reacted somehow. But he did not. He simply stood there with the fox and stared. I still do not know what that light was. I still do not know why the fox froze in the road. I still do not know whether the old man was connected to the animal or whether we only assumed he was because they appeared together. But I know that after we ran away, they followed far enough to come out from under the trees. And I know that neither of us wanted to stand there long enough to find out whether they were going to keep coming. Since then, I have been careful about dark country roads. There is something about a road with no lights, no houses, and trees closing in overhead that makes every small sound feel wrong. During the day, it might be nothing more than a peaceful place to walk. At night, it can feel like the world ends just beyond the edge of your vision. And sometimes, something is standing in the middle of the road, waiting for you to notice it. I have kept this story to myself for a long time because every time I tell it, people either laugh, assume we were just drunk teenagers being stupid, or say that we probably imagined most of it. Maybe parts of it do have normal explanations. I know that. We were 15. We had been drinking. We were outside late at night in a small backwoods town. Those facts do not exactly make us reliable witnesses. I understand why people would hear the story and immediately decide that it was nothing more than a bunch of teenagers getting too drunk and scaring themselves. But I was there. And even now, I cannot shake the feeling that something else was happening that night. I lived in a fairly normal, middle-class suburban town. It was not some huge city, but it was not isolated either. There were schools, stores, neighborhoods, parks, and the usual things you expect in a decent suburban area. You could walk around at night without feeling like you were completely cut off from the world, but if you went a little farther out, past the nicer neighborhoods and familiar roads, there were smaller towns surrounded by woods and fields, places with fewer houses, fewer streetlights, and a feeling that everything got quieter much earlier in the evening. My friend Jake lived in one of those places. It was not far away in terms of driving distance, but it felt different from where I lived. The roads were darker. The houses were more spread out. There were larger patches of empty land between neighborhoods. At night, you could look down a road and see almost nothing except trees, the occasional porch light, and darkness stretching farther than you expected. Jake was having a birthday party that night. Nothing huge or fancy. Just a group of teenage boys hanging around, drinking things we should not have had, acting like we were much older than we actually were, and doing the kind of dumb things 15-year-olds think are exciting. We had some Palm Bays, which at the time felt like the most rebellious thing in the world. Looking back, it was probably embarrassing. We were kids, trying to act cool because we had managed to get alcohol. None of us were really capable of handling it properly, but we were old enough to believe we were invincible and young enough not to understand how quickly a night could become dangerous. Jake was in a good mood at first. It was his birthday, and he was laughing, talking, and doing the usual stuff. Nothing seemed wrong with him. He did not seem upset, sick, angry, or unusually drunk. He was just having a good time with his friends. At some point, we decided to walk down to our old elementary school. It was only around a kilometer from Jake's house, maybe a little more, depending on which way you went. We all knew the school because most of us had gone there when we were younger. During the day, it was completely ordinary. A small local elementary school with a playground, a field, a parking lot, and the usual buildings you do not think much about after you move on to high school. But at night, it looked different. The school grounds were mostly dark. There were a few lights around the building, but the parking lot was large and mostly empty. The playground equipment stood in shadows. The windows reflected whatever little light there was from nearby streets. The whole place felt strange in the way schools often do after dark. Places that are full of noise in the daytime become unsettling when they are empty. We were not there to break in or vandalize anything. We were mostly just hanging around, walking around the outside of the school, talking loudly, laughing at dumb jokes, and trying to make the night feel more exciting than it actually was. At first, it was normal. We were all a little drunk, not completely wasted, but definitely more careless than we should have been. We were joking around, daring each other to do stupid stuff, and talking about old memories from elementary school. Then, Jake stopped. He froze in place. At first, nobody thought much about it. We were standing near the edge of the school grounds, close enough to see the parking lot. Jake had been walking with us 1 second, then suddenly he just stopped moving. He stared out into the lot like something had caught his attention. His body went completely still. At first, I thought he was trying to mess with us. Jake had a weird sense of humor sometimes. He liked making people wonder what he was doing. So when he stopped and stared, we assumed he was either pretending to see something or trying to get someone to ask what was wrong. But he did not say anything. He just stood there. Minutes passed. Not 1 or 2 minutes. More like 15. 15 minutes of Jake standing in the same spot, looking toward the parking lot without moving much or responding normally. We were 15 years old and a little drunk, so our reaction was not exactly mature or helpful. Instead of taking it seriously right away, we started messing with him. Someone balanced something on his head. Somebody else tried waving a hand in front of his face. We made jokes about him being possessed, hypnotized, or too drunk to walk. He barely reacted. He did not laugh. He did not tell us to stop. He did not look at us. He just kept staring. The longer it went on, the less funny it became. The parking lot was empty as far as I could tell. There were no cars moving through it. No people standing near the building. No headlights. No security guard. No one hanging around the playground. It was just dark pavement, painted parking lines, and the shadowy outline of the school. But Jake was staring at something. At least he seemed to be. Eventually he spoke. The suddenness of it made me jump. His voice sounded quiet, almost uncertain. He did not turn around to look at us. He kept staring out into the parking lot and said, "Hey guys, do you see those guys in the parking lot?" The way he said it changed the mood immediately. Nobody laughed after that. I looked out toward the parking lot. There was nothing there, at least nothing that I could see. I remember trying to look harder because the way Jake said it made me expect something. I scanned the edge of the lot, the spaces near the school entrance, the far side near the trees, the places where shadows were deepest. Nothing. No group of people. No figures. No movement. I told him, "Bro, you're tripping. There's nothing in the parking lot." I tried to make it sound casual, but I was already uneasy. There is a difference between a friend joking about seeing something and a friend standing completely still for 15 minutes, then quietly asking whether everyone else can see people in an empty parking lot. Jake did not answer. He kept looking. That was when I suggested we go back to his house. I did not make a big deal out of it. I did not want to sound scared. I just said something like, we should probably head back, because suddenly I did not want to be standing near an empty school parking lot anymore. The rest of the group agreed. I think they felt it too. Nothing had actually happened. We had not seen anyone. Nobody had approached us. But the atmosphere had changed. It no longer felt like a normal birthday night. The school grounds felt too quiet. The lot felt too dark. And Jake was acting in a way that none of us understood. So we started walking back. The walk should have been simple. We just had to follow the road back toward Jake's house. It was not far. We had walked there without any problem, and we knew where we were going. But not long after we left the school, Jake did something that made the entire situation even stranger. He took off all his clothes. Not just his shirt, not just his shoes. Everything he stripped completely naked in the middle of the walk home. Then he started running. He did not explain himself. He did not laugh. He did not turn around and say it was a joke. He just threw off his clothes and sprinted down the road toward his house. For a second, all of us stood there in shock. It was so sudden that nobody knew how to react. One moment, Jake had been walking with us, quiet and strange after staring into the parking lot. The next moment, he was naked and running full speed down a dark road in the middle of the night. Then he disappeared ahead of us. We could hear him for a few seconds, his footsteps moving fast against the road. Then nothing. The rest of us were left standing there with his clothes. I remember feeling confused, annoyed, and scared all at once. Part of me wanted to laugh because the situation was so ridiculous. Another part of me knew something was wrong. Jake was not acting like someone who was just having fun or trying to embarrass us. He had looked frightened at the school. He had stared at an empty parking lot for 15 minutes. He had asked whether we could see people who were not there. Then he had run away without clothes. We picked up his things. There were 5 of us besides Jake, and we gathered his clothes as best we could. Somebody carried his shirt. Somebody grabbed his pants. Someone else had his shoes. We did not really talk much while we did it. We just started walking after him. The road back to his house was quiet. The backwoods part of town seemed even darker now. There were not many streetlights. The trees along the road looked like solid black walls. Every house we passed had its lights off, or only one dim porch light glowing near the entrance. We were all already unsettled. Then the sky lit up. It looked like lightning. A huge flash appeared somewhere in the distance, bright enough to light up the sky for a second. The trees, road, and houses around us became visible in a cold white-blue burst. Then it was dark again. But there was no thunder, no sound at all. At first, I thought maybe we had just not heard it yet. Sometimes thunder takes a few seconds to arrive, especially if lightning is far away. So we waited. Nothing, no rumble, no crack, no distant storm noise, only silence. We all saw it. That part matters to me. It was not just me. It was not just one person who was drunker than the others. Everyone stopped and looked up. We all knew the sky had flashed. Then it happened again. About a minute later, there was another silent flash. The sky lit up in the distance. Again, no thunder, no rain, no wind, no normal signs of a storm. The flashes continued as we walked back toward Jake's house. Every minute or so, the sky would brighten for a second. It was not exactly the same as a normal lightning strike. It was more like the clouds were glowing from behind, except there were no obvious storm clouds close enough for us to see clearly in the dark. Each flash made us more nervous. We were already walking through a dark rural town carrying our friend's clothes after he had run away naked, because he believed he saw people in an empty school parking lot. Now the sky kept lighting up without making a sound. I tried to convince myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe there was a storm far away. Maybe the sound was too distant to hear. Maybe there was lightning somewhere beyond the hills. Maybe it was just sheet lightning. At the time, I did not really know what sheet lightning was. I only knew that the flashes looked strange and silent, and the lack of sound made the whole situation feel wrong. We kept walking. Nobody wanted to stay on that road longer than necessary. I remember us moving faster, not running exactly, but definitely not strolling anymore. We were trying to get back to Jake's house as quickly as possible while still carrying his clothes. The flashes kept coming, bright, silent, then gone. By the time we reached Jake's house, everyone was tense. We went inside and found him crashed on his bed. He was asleep, completely out. He had somehow made it home before us, gotten inside, and passed out in bed. He was naked under the blankets, or at least he had gotten himself covered somehow. He looked peaceful, like nothing unusual had happened. That was almost the weirdest part. We stood there looking at him, still holding his clothes, trying to understand what had just happened. He had been standing frozen at the school. He had stared into an empty parking lot. He had asked whether we could see people there. He had run home naked. Then, he had passed out and apparently forgotten all of it. We put his clothes somewhere nearby and left him alone. For the rest of the night, the other guys and I talked about it. Not in a serious, organized way. We were still 15. We mostly sat around saying things like, "What the hell was that?" and trying to joke about it because we did not know what else to do. But underneath the jokes, there was real discomfort. None of us could explain why Jake had acted that way. The next morning, I looked up the flashing sky phenomenon. I searched for silent lightning, distant flashes, and whatever terms I could think of. The closest thing I found was sheet lightning. The description said it could happen when lightning from a distant storm lit up clouds of the sky, but the thunder was too far away to be heard. That explanation made sense. At least, it made enough sense for me to hold on to it. So I told myself that the flashes were just sheet lightning. I told myself Jake had been drunk and acting stupid. I told myself he had probably seen shadows in the parking lot, gotten scared, panicked, and done something embarrassing. Maybe he had been more intoxicated than the rest of us. Maybe he had been dealing with something mentally or emotionally that nobody knew about. Maybe he had taken something else before we got there, though I never had proof of that. There were plenty of possible explanations, but I still felt uneasy. Because it was not only the individual things, it was the way everything happened together. Jake froze and stared for 15 minutes. He asked us whether we saw people in an empty parking lot. He suddenly stripped naked and ran home. The sky flashed silently over and over while we carried his clothes through dark roads. Then we found him asleep, and he remembered none of it. The whole night felt wrong from the moment Jake stopped moving. Even now, I remember the feeling more than anything else, that heavy, uncomfortable feeling in the air. The sense that we were standing too close to something we did not understand. It was not like watching a horror movie. There was no monster. There was no obvious ghost. There was no single moment where something impossible stood in front of us. It was a series of strange things that did not fit together. And sometimes, that is worse. You can explain one odd event. You can explain a drunk teenager acting weird. You can explain distant lightning. You can explain a dark parking lot making people see shapes that are not there. But when it all happens in the same night, around the same person, in the same uneasy atmosphere, it starts to feel like more than coincidence. I do not hang out with those guys anymore. Life changed, people moved on, and we all ended up going in different directions. I have not seen Jake in a long time. When I have brought the night up before, he does not remember it. He does not remember standing in the parking lot. He does not remember asking us about the people he claimed to see. He does not remember taking off his clothes. He does not remember running home. He does not remember the silent flashes in the sky. For him, it is a blank space. For me, it is one of the strangest nights I can remember. I do not expect everyone to believe me. I know how it sounds. We were 15, drinking Palm Bays in a backwoods town, walking around an elementary school at night. That is not the beginning of a story most people will take seriously. But I know what I saw. I know Jake was staring into an empty lot for a long time. I know he spoke about people none of us could see. I know he ran away naked. And I know the sky kept flashing without making a sound while the rest of us carried his clothes back to his house. Maybe it was just teenage stupidity, alcohol, fear, and distant lightning. Maybe it was all coincidence. But after all these years, I still have the same feeling I had that night. That something was there in the parking lot. Something Jake saw, and something the rest of us were lucky not to. I had been living on my own for the first time for around 3 months when the strange things started happening. Up until then, I had been enjoying having my own place. It was not a huge apartment, but it was mine. I could come and go when I wanted, cook whatever I wanted, stay up late without worrying about waking anyone, and leave things exactly where I liked them. After living with family or roommates for most of my life, being alone felt like freedom. It also felt quieter than I expected. When you first move into your own apartment, you start noticing sounds you never paid attention to before. The refrigerator clicks on in the middle of the night. Pipes make strange noises. Someone closes a door somewhere in the building, and the sound travels through the walls. A neighbor walks above you, and for a second it feels as though someone is in your own hallway. At first, every little sound made me look up. Then I got used to it. The apartment itself seemed normal. It was clean enough, reasonably modern, and nothing about it gave me a bad feeling when I moved in. There were no strange smells, no hidden rooms, no creepy landlord stories, and no obvious signs that anyone had lived there before me in a way that felt unsettling. It was just an apartment. For the first few months, I had no reason to think anything was wrong. Then, I took a day trip out of town. It was nothing dramatic. I had been gone for the day and came back late that night, tired from traveling. I remember getting home, bringing my things inside, and feeling relieved to be back in my own bed. I did not really inspect the apartment when I returned. I locked the door, put my bag down, probably checked my phone for a while, and went to sleep. The next morning, I was eating breakfast when I heard a strange beeping sound from the main hallway. At first, I ignored it. A smoke detector can chirp for a lot of reasons. Sometimes the battery is low. Sometimes it makes a random noise when the power changes. Sometimes a detector in another apartment makes a sound that travels through the walls and makes you think it is coming from your own place. But the beeping kept happening. It was not the loud, full alarm sound. It was that sharp, annoying chirp that happens every few minutes when a smoke detector battery is dying or missing. The sound echoed slightly in the hall, and after the third or fourth chirp, I got up to see where it was coming from. The smoke detector was mounted near the ceiling in the main hallway. I looked up at it and immediately noticed something was off. The battery compartment was open, not loose, not cracked. Open, the small plastic door on the detector had been pulled down, and the battery was gone. I stood there for a moment, trying to understand what I was seeing. The detector had been working before. I knew that because I had been living there for months. A smoke detector without a battery does not usually sit quietly for 3 months. It chirps. It does it over and over until somebody loses their mind and replaces the battery. If it had been empty when I moved in, I would have noticed. If the battery had been low for weeks, I would have heard it. But I had not heard anything before that morning. The detector had worked. Now the compartment was open and the battery was missing. My first thought was that the battery had somehow fallen out. Maybe the compartment was not fully shut before. Maybe the battery had slipped loose when the door opened. Maybe it had fallen straight down and rolled under something. I looked on the floor beneath the detector. Nothing. I checked along the baseboards. Nothing. I moved shoes, bags, and anything else near the hallway. Nothing. The battery was gone. At that point, I started considering whether maintenance had come in while I was away. That was not impossible. Apartments sometimes have maintenance staff enter for inspections, repairs, or routine work. Maybe they had checked the smoke detector while I was gone. Maybe the battery had died and they intended to replace it, but forgot. Maybe someone had opened the compartment, taken the battery, and planned to return later. But I had cameras inside my apartment. Not because I was especially paranoid, but because I lived alone for the first time, and it gave me some peace of mind. I had set them up to watch the entrance and common areas when I was out. I thought they were useful for checking whether packages had arrived, whether maintenance came in, or whether anything unusual happened while I was away. So I checked the footage. I expected to see someone. Maybe a maintenance worker entering with a key. Maybe someone in a uniform walking through the hall. Maybe someone standing beneath the smoke detector. There was nobody. The footage showed no maintenance visit. No landlord. No one entering the apartment. No one standing in the hallway. Nothing. I watched it more than once because I thought I might have missed something. I checked the time around when I returned from my trip. I checked earlier in the day. I checked the overnight footage. Nothing. The apartment had been empty. I was the only person who had come home. I did not know what to make of it. There had to be a normal explanation, I told myself. Maybe I had somehow opened the compartment without realizing it. Maybe I had bumped the detector while carrying something in. Maybe the battery had fallen into some impossible corner, and I just had not found it yet. But even that did not make much sense. The smoke detector was high enough on the wall that I could not casually knock it open. I would have needed a chair or a ladder to get close enough to touch it. And I had not done that. I had not changed any batteries. I had not even thought about the detector since moving in. Still, I did not want to spiral over something small. So I went out and bought batteries. I replaced the one in the hallway, made sure the compartment was fully closed, and tested it. It worked. No more chirping. For a few days, I forgot about it. Then, a few nights later, I heard another beep. This time, it came from my study. It was late. I had been doing something in the living room, maybe watching a show or scrolling through my phone. The apartment was quiet, and the sound caught my attention immediately because I knew exactly what it was. The chirp. The smoke detector warning sound. I stopped what I was doing and listened. A minute or two later, it happened again. I walked into the study. The room was dark except for the light from the hallway. The desk was where I had left it. My chair was pushed in. My computer was off. Nothing looked out of place. Then I looked up. The smoke detector battery compartment was wide open. The battery was gone. I remember just standing there beneath it. It was the same thing again. Not a low battery. Not a detector malfunctioning while the battery remained inside. The compartment had been opened, and the battery had been removed. This time, I searched more carefully. I checked the floor. I checked behind the desk. I checked beneath shelves. I checked every spot where a small battery could have rolled. Nothing. It had vanished. I did not have cameras covering every single angle of the study at that point, but I checked what I could. I looked at the footage from the entrance. I checked the hallway. I checked the time periods when I had been away from home. No one had come in. No one had entered while I was sleeping. No one had stood near the study door. There was no sign of an intruder, no sign of maintenance, and no sign of another person inside the apartment. I replaced the battery again. This time, I made a point of checking the compartment several times after I closed it. I pressed it firmly into place. I made sure the plastic cover clicked shut. I told myself maybe the first one had been defective. Maybe the second one was too. But the thought had started to bother me. Someone had removed batteries from 2 smoke detectors in 2 different rooms. And I lived alone. A few weeks passed. I tried to forget about it. I told myself I was overthinking things. I had a new apartment. I was alone. I had cameras. I was constantly aware of the fact that nobody else was there. That kind of situation can make a person notice patterns that are not really patterns. Maybe the detectors had faulty compartments. Maybe the batteries were old. Maybe I was forgetting that I had changed something. Maybe I had been tired when I came home from my trip and had done something strange without remembering. I tried to accept those explanations. Then it happened in my bedroom. I woke up one night to the same beeping. At first, I did not know where it was coming from. The sound seemed closer than before, louder and sharper because I had been asleep. I sat up in bed, confused and irritated, trying to figure out whether it was coming from the hall, the study, or another apartment. Then it chirped again. It was above me. I looked up at the smoke detector in my bedroom. The battery compartment was hanging open. The battery was gone. I remember feeling a cold wave move through me. That one was different. The hallway and study were one thing. Those were rooms I moved through all day. Maybe I could have bumped something. Maybe I could have forgotten something. Maybe there was a weird problem with the apartment. But my bedroom was where I slept. The smoke detector was above me while I had been lying in bed. The compartment had been closed when I went to sleep. I knew that because after the second incident, I had become obsessive about checking them. I would look at the detectors in each room and make sure the battery doors were shut. Yet now, in the middle of the night, the battery door was open, and the battery was gone. I did not immediately get out of bed. I stared at it for a long time. The room was quiet, except for the chirp repeating every few minutes. I remember looking toward my bedroom door, wondering whether I had somehow slept through someone entering. I wondered whether maintenance had come in without me noticing. I wondered whether someone had a key and had been moving through my apartment. But that seemed impossible. The front door was locked. The cameras showed nothing. There was no sound of anyone leaving. And even if someone had entered, why would they take the batteries from smoke detectors? Why not steal something valuable? Why not take electronics, money, or anything else? Why remove only the batteries? I got out of bed and checked the apartment. I turned on lights in every room. I checked the front door lock. I checked the windows. I looked through the hallway, the kitchen, the bathroom, the study, and the living room. I opened closets. I looked behind doors. I checked places that did not even make sense. There was nobody there. The apartment was empty. I replaced the battery in my bedroom smoke detector. Then I sat awake for a long time, listening to the building. Every creak sounded louder than it normally did. Every car passing outside made me tense. Every small shift in the walls made me wonder whether someone was moving somewhere I could not see. Eventually, I fell asleep, but I did not sleep well. I lived in that apartment for 2 more years. The smoke detector incidents never happened again after the bedroom one. At least, not in the same obvious way. I kept batteries in every detector. I checked them constantly. Sometimes I would look up at the compartments before bed just to make sure they were still shut. They always were. But other strange things happened from time to time. Not constantly, not every day. Just enough that I could never fully relax. Sometimes I would see a flash of blue light in the corner of my eye. It was never directly in front of me. It was always peripheral, quick enough that I would turn my head and see nothing. It looked like a small blue flicker, almost like the reflection of a screen or a tiny electrical spark. But there would be no screen on, no television, no phone lighting up, no car headlights passing the window, nothing that could explain it. The flashes were never strong enough to light up a room. They were just brief, sharp bits of blue at the edge of my vision. The kind of thing that makes you look over your shoulder because your brain insists you saw something move. Every time, there was nothing there. At first, I blamed my eyes. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I had stared at a computer too long. Maybe the light from outside was reflecting off something. Maybe I was catching the blue glow of a device and turning too late to identify it. But then it started happening in rooms where there was no obvious source of blue light. The hallway, the bathroom, my bedroom at night. A flash near the corner of the room, then nothing. I would stand there staring into the darkness, waiting for it to happen again. It never happened twice in the same moment. It was always one quick flicker. Then, nothing. The blue flashes were unnerving, but I could still tell myself they were probably nothing. The bruises were harder to ignore. I began waking up with marks on my forearms. At first, I did not think much about them. People get bruises all the time. You can bump into furniture and forget about it. You can sleep awkwardly. You can knock your arm against the doorframe, a desk, or the edge of a bed without noticing in the moment. But these did not look random. They looked like fingerprints. There would be several dark marks clustered together on my forearm, shaped like someone had grabbed me tightly. Sometimes they were on the inside of my arm, sometimes closer to the outside. They were not long scratches. They were not one large bruise from hitting something. They looked like fingers. I would wake up, look down, and try to remember whether I had hurt myself the day before. Nothing. No memory of falling. No memory of bumping into anything. No memory of someone grabbing me. I lived alone. There was nobody around who could have touched me while I slept. I started taking photos of the bruises, partly because I wanted proof for myself, partly because I was scared I would forget how strange they looked. If I talked about it without photos, it would sound like I was just being dramatic. Everybody wakes up with a bruise now and then. Everyone has marks they cannot explain. But the pattern of these bruises bothered me. They were too specific. Sometimes I would stand in front of the mirror and compare the marks to my own hand. The spacing looked close, like fingers wrapping around an arm. I hated doing that. I hated the thought that someone could have been standing beside my bed, gripping my forearm, while I slept through it. So I tried not to think about it. For 2 more years, I kept living there. Most days were ordinary. I went to work. I came home. I paid bills. I watched things, cooked things, cleaned, slept, and did all the normal things people do in their own apartments. Nothing dramatic happened every night. There were no voices, no figures walking through the halls, no doors slamming, no objects flying across rooms. That almost made it more difficult to explain. The strange things were small. A battery gone from a smoke detector, a bright blue flicker at the edge of my vision, fingerprint-shaped bruises after waking up. Each event by itself could have a normal explanation. But when you live alone, and things keep happening with no clear source, it starts changing how you feel in your own home. I started checking things more often. I checked locks twice. I checked camera footage even when I had no reason to. I looked up at the smoke detectors before bed. I made sure every battery compartment was closed. I kept lights on longer than I used to. I avoided walking into dark rooms without turning a light on first. Even when I told myself I was being irrational, I still did it because I could not shake the feeling that I was not completely alone in that apartment. The smoke detector incidents were the worst part because they were physical. Something had opened the compartments. Something had taken the batteries. It was not a dream. It was not a shadow. It was not a feeling. I had stood beneath 3 separate smoke detectors and seen the same thing, a wide-open battery compartment and an empty space where a battery should have been. And the cameras showed no one entering. I still do not know what happened. Maybe there was a problem with the smoke detectors that I never understood. Maybe the compartments were defective and batteries somehow fell out into places I never checked. Maybe the cameras missed something. Maybe maintenance did enter without my knowledge. Maybe the blue flashes were eye strain and the bruises came from sleeping awkwardly. I know all of those things are possible. But the details never fit neatly enough for me. The batteries did not fall onto the floor. The compartments did not simply loosen. They were opened. The batteries disappeared. The cameras showed an empty apartment. And after that, I spent 2 years waking up with bruises that looked like someone had grabbed me, while blue lights flashed at the edge of my vision in rooms where there should have been nothing. I eventually moved out. Leaving was strange, because part of me was relieved, but part of me felt foolish. I had spent 2 years being unsettled by things I could not prove. Maybe I was leaving behind nothing more than faulty equipment, poor sleep, and my own imagination. But I slept differently after I left. I stopped checking smoke detector compartments every night. I stopped staring into corners whenever I saw a blue flicker. I stopped waking up and immediately looking at my forearms. And for the first time in a long time, my apartment felt like it belonged only to me. Still, every time I hear a smoke detector chirp now, I remember that hallway. I remember looking up and seeing the compartment wide open. I remember searching for a battery that was nowhere on the floor. And I remember the feeling of realizing that something in my home had changed while I was away. Even though no one had come inside, 15 years ago, on Earth Day, my nephew, my brother, and I were inside the house at around 10:30 at night. I was 16 at the time, and I had always loved looking at the sky. I liked stargazing whenever the night was clear enough. It did not matter whether there was anything special happening. I could stand outside for a long time just watching the stars, trying to spot planets, looking for constellations, or waiting to see a shooting star. That night, I had no reason to expect anything unusual. It was late, but not so late that the whole neighborhood was asleep. The house was quiet, though. My nephew was only 6 years old, and he was still awake because he had been spending time with us. My brother was there, too. We were all inside doing normal things, probably watching television, talking, or just relaxing before bed. At some point, I glanced outside. Normally, when I looked out at that time of night, I saw darkness. Maybe a few porch lights from other houses. Maybe the faint outline of trees. Maybe stars, depending on the weather and how much light was around us. But that night, the sky looked different. At first, I did not understand what I was seeing. There were colors outside. Not one light, not a passing car, not fireworks. Colors, lots of them. They seemed to be hanging in the darkness, moving high above the ground. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I had been inside under artificial lights. And sometimes when you look into darkness after that, your vision can do strange things. You see spots, reflections, or little flashes that disappear once your eyes adjust. But these colors did not disappear. They kept moving. I moved closer to the window. The lights were not random. That was the first detail that made me uneasy. If it had been fireworks, there would have been bursts, smoke, sparks, and noise. If it had been an airplane, there would have been predictable blinking lights moving steadily across the sky. If it had been a helicopter, there would have been sound long before it came close enough for me to see it clearly. But these lights did not move like anything I recognized. They were organized, synchronized. It looked almost like a stage show in the sky, as though someone had set up a huge display above the neighborhood and was controlling every color and every movement carefully. The lights shifted together. They changed positions with a strange sense of order. They did not scatter or flicker randomly. For a moment, I actually wondered whether there was some event happening nearby. Maybe there was a festival. Maybe there was a concert. Maybe someone was setting off fireworks somewhere beyond the houses. But it was Earth Day. It was not the 4th of July. There was no reason for anyone to be putting on a huge display. There were no loud explosions, no firecrackers, no smoke drifting through the air, no sounds of people celebrating. There was only the sky and those colors. I felt curious before I felt afraid. I ran outside. The second I stepped out, I realized the lights looked even stranger from the open air. There was nothing between me and the sky now. No window reflection. No chance that I was mistaking a light inside the house for something outside. The colors were real. They were high above us, but not so high that they looked like stars. They moved slowly across sections of the sky, almost as though they were connected to something larger that I could not fully see. I stood outside and stared. The colors shifted again. Then I noticed they were beginning to form shapes. At first, it was difficult to make out. The lights seemed to move around one another, changing position in the dark. But the more I watched, the more obvious it became. They were forming triangles. Not loose triangles made of 3 lights blinking in the distance. Actual triangular outlines. The lights would take positions that created a clear, sharp shape against the night sky. Then the triangle would rotate slowly. As it turned, I could see that the lights were not floating by themselves. They seemed to sit along the edge of something. Something solid. Something large. The outline of an aircraft began to appear. I remember my stomach dropping when I understood that. At first, I had thought I was watching a strange light display. But now, I could see the outline of a craft. It was dark against the sky, but the colored lights made its shape visible. It looked triangular, and the more it turned, the clearer the outline became. It was not shaped like a normal plane. It did not have a long body with wings stretching out from either side. It did not move in a straight line. It did not have the usual red and white navigation lights that blink in predictable patterns. It seemed to hover in one place, turning slowly as if it were balancing itself in the air. I stood there trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was a military aircraft. Maybe it was some kind of experimental plane. Maybe it was a helicopter viewed from a strange angle. But none of those explanations matched what I was seeing. The craft was hovering. It was not simply moving slowly. It was staying in one area of the sky. It would bob slightly, shifting up and down or moving a little from side to side, then settle again. It looked almost as though it was floating. And it was silent. That was one of the most disturbing parts. A normal aircraft makes noise. Even when a plane is high in the sky, you can usually hear a distant rumble. Helicopters are loud. You can hear them long before they pass overhead. The sound of blades carries through the air and shakes windows when they get close enough. But these things made no sound. They hovered and shifted in the sky without any engine noise, rotor noise, or humming that I could hear. I kept staring at them, trying to tell myself that there had to be a normal reason. Maybe the wind was carrying the sound away. Maybe they were farther away than they appeared. Maybe I was too shocked to notice the noise. But the more I watched, the more wrong it felt. The colored lights continued moving in organized patterns. The triangular shapes kept turning slowly. I could see outlines forming and disappearing as the crafts shifted. That was when I called for my brother and nephew. I did not want to be the only one seeing it. I shouted for them to come outside. At first, they probably thought I was just excited about something in the sky. But when they stepped out and looked up, they stopped too. They saw it. All three of us stood outside, staring upward. My nephew was only 6, so he did not fully understand what he was looking at. But he could see the lights and the strange shapes. He was old enough to know that it was not normal. He looked up at the sky with the kind of wide-eyed fear a child gets when something does not make sense. My brother stared for a long time without saying much. The more we watched, the more obvious it became that these were not regular aircraft. There seemed to be more than one. The lights moved in patterns around the sky. Some of the shapes looked like separate objects, and others seemed to be grouped together. I could not count them perfectly because they kept shifting, but there were several, at least 4 or 5, maybe more. They hovered in different areas, turning slowly and moving in ways that did not look natural. I remember wondering how something could stay in the air like that. What kind of plane could hover silently? What kind of helicopter could stay in one place without making any sound? What kind of aircraft could move up, down, and sideways in the same small section of sky, then rotate slowly without drifting away? The fear began building slowly. At first, it had been curiosity, then confusion, then amazement. But eventually, it became fear because there was no explanation that felt right. Then everything changed. Suddenly, we heard a sound. It was loud. Deep, fast, boom, 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 boom. The sound came from above and behind us, and it was so sudden that all of us reacted at once. We looked up and saw large helicopters coming in low. These were not small news helicopters. They were not little civilian helicopters flying over a highway or a traffic accident. They looked military. Huge, dark, heavy, the kind of helicopters that looked more like machines of war than normal aircraft. They were flying low enough that we could see how large they were. Their rotor blades seemed enormous. The sound of them filled the air and shook through my chest. There was no way to ignore them. One came over, then another, then another. At first, I thought there were only 3. 3 massive military helicopters flew over our heads, heading in the direction of the strange triangular crafts. But then I noticed more in the distance. The sky was full of movement. More helicopters were coming from the same direction, or moving toward the same point in the sky. I could not count them all exactly because it was dark and chaotic, but there were many, at least 20, from what I remember, headed toward the objects. It felt like something from a war movie. The sudden noise made the silent craft seem even stranger. The contrast was impossible to ignore. The helicopters were loud, heavy, and clearly mechanical. You could hear the engines. You could hear the rotors chopping through the air. You could feel their presence. The triangular crafts had been silent. They had hovered in the sky as if sound and gravity did not apply to them. The helicopters moved toward them. For a moment, I thought we were about to see some kind of confrontation. I did not know what to expect. Maybe the strange lights would turn out to be secret military aircraft. Maybe the helicopters were part of a training exercise. Maybe there was some complicated explanation that would make sense once we saw what happened next. But before the helicopters got close enough, the crafts moved. They did not slowly fly away. They did not turn like airplanes. They did not descend or climb in the way helicopters do. They shot away. One of the objects moved straight upward. It did not rise gradually. It did not tilt and gain altitude. It just went up at a speed that made it look as though it had been pulled out of the sky. The others took off in different directions. One went sideways. Another moved across the sky at an angle. Others disappeared in separate directions so fast that I could barely follow them with my eyes. Then we heard the sounds. Snap, crack, sharp, sudden sounds like something breaking the air. They reminded me of the way a jet can sound when it passes overhead at extreme speed, except these sounds came after the objects had already moved. They were already gone, or nearly gone, by the time the sound reached us. It felt like they had broken the sound barrier. I had never seen anything move that fast before. 1 second, the craft was hovering in the sky with its lights forming a triangle. The next second, it was gone. Not hidden by clouds, not fading into the distance. Gone, the whole thing happened so quickly that my brain could not process it. I just stood there, frozen. My nephew started freaking out. He was 6 years old, and I do not blame him. He had been standing outside looking at impossible lights in the sky. Then giant helicopters had flown overhead, and then the objects had shot away with loud, cracking sounds. My brother said, "Fuck this." Then he ran inside. He did not stand around trying to explain it. He did not wait for more helicopters. He just turned and ran into the house. I stayed outside for a few more seconds because I was too scared to move. That sounds strange, but fear can do that. Sometimes you do not run. Sometimes you freeze. Your body does not know what to do because the thing you are looking at does not fit into anything you understand. I looked up at the sky where the objects had been. The helicopters were still moving in that direction. Their noise continued for a while, and I could see some of them farther away. But the strange crafts were gone. They had disappeared so quickly that it felt unreal. Eventually, I ran inside, too. For the rest of the night, none of us knew what to say. My nephew was scared. My brother was angry and unsettled. I was shaking, trying to figure out whether I had really seen what I thought I saw. At first, I considered the possibility that I had imagined it. Maybe I had seen something normal, and my mind had turned it into something bigger. Maybe the lights had been planes viewed at strange angles. Maybe the helicopters had been part of a military exercise. Maybe the sounds were just normal aircraft noise echoing through the night. But I was not alone. My brother saw it. My nephew saw it. And even now, years later, my brother and I can remember the same details. We remember the colors. We remember how they moved together. We remember the triangular outlines. We remember the silent hovering. We remember the massive helicopters flying over. We remember the objects shooting away in different directions. My nephew is an adult now. He has a near-perfect memory for things that happened when he was younger, and he remembers it too. He was only 6 at the time, but he remembers standing outside, looking up, being scared, and seeing the strange lights in the sky. That matters to me. It means I was not alone in making sense of something impossible. It means the memory did not come only from my imagination. There were witnesses. 3 people saw the same event from the same yard on the same night. Over the years, I have tried to think of rational explanations. Could it have been military aircraft? Possibly. Could it have been helicopters responding to something else? Maybe could the lights have been some kind of secret test or exercise? I do not know. Could the objects have been drones? At the time, they did not look or move like anything I understood as a drone, and the way they seemed to hover, rotate, and suddenly vanish at extreme speed did not fit with any ordinary aircraft I had seen. The military helicopters were real enough. There was no question about that. We heard them. We saw them. They were huge and loud, and they were clearly moving toward the strange objects. That is what has always stayed with me. Whatever those things were, the helicopters appeared to be going after them. It felt as though the strange crafts had become a threat, or at least something important enough that the military response was immediate and overwhelming. It was not one helicopter passing by. It was not a normal flyover. It looked organized. The helicopters headed in their direction. Then, the crafts were gone. I cannot say with certainty what they were. I cannot say they were aliens. I cannot say they came from another planet. I do not know enough to make that claim. But I also cannot call it fantasy. I cannot call it imagination. I cannot say it was a story I made up because I wanted attention. I was 16 years old. I loved staring at the sky. And I knew the difference between stars, planes, helicopters, fireworks, and normal lights. I had never seen anything like those crafts before that night, and I have never seen anything like them since. 15 years later, I still get chills when I think about it. I remember the pitch-black sky suddenly filling with color. I remember realizing those colors were moving with purpose. I remember the triangular shapes turning slowly above us. I remember how silent they were. Then I remember the sound of military helicopters roaring overhead. And I remember the moment those strange crafts shot away so fast that the sky seemed to crack behind them. Do I believe in UFOs? After that night, I cannot completely deny the possibility. I do not know what I saw, but I know it was there. And I know I was not the only one who saw it. Look, if you're still watching, you already know what this channel is. No jump scares, no fake drama, just real stories about real people who survive things most of us can't even imagine. And that's scarier than any movie could ever be. If you want more of this raw, unfiltered truth, told the way it deserves to be told, subscribe to Lacuna Noir. We're not here to waste your time. We're here to tell the stories that actually matter. Thanks for listening. Now go get some sleep, if you can.